it's knowing that you can be a situational extrovert, meaning that situational extrovert, it's mastering the art of asking questions. The E is the experience. What kind of experience is the other person going to have because you've connected with them? The A, are you authentic and are you an authority as it relates to what you're doing? The magic happens when you have a meaningful conversation with another person. And that's where the T comes in. Think about who you are talking with. By asking questions, the better the questions, you're going to get better the answers.
Welcome back to the Hustle and Grind podcast, the show where we dig into why real entrepreneurs trade comfort for conviction. This isn't about vanity metrics or overnight success. It's about the stories behind building a reputation that actually matters. I'm your host, Andrew, keynote architect, platform builder, and fellow founder in the trenches. Today, I'm sitting down with Robert Butwin, best-selling author, elite networker, and someone who's been turning entrepreneurial vision into reality for decades. He wrote Street Smart Networking. He's been featured in trade journals, mentored entrepreneurs across Europe and Asia, and was inducted into the MLMIA Hall of Fame back in 2009. We're going deep on virtual networking, his 8 Ps for a prosperous life, and what it really takes to build wealth by helping others win. Let's get into it. So, Robert, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. I really appreciate it. I know we've already had a couple of conversations, and honestly, you have given me a huge amount of value in the short time we've known each other. So I deeply appreciate that. And I also appreciate you being on the podcast today, too. I know we're going to give our listeners a bunch of really great value. So thank you so much for being on today. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome. And I'm really excited to be on this podcast today because the kind of information that you and I are going to talk about was the thing that changed my life.
Awesome. And I love those life-changing moments, and I love stuff, anything that we can use to help others and to change their lives. So let's get right into this, because you are a power networker, and that's your thing. And you authored a book, The Street Smart Networking. I want to know a little bit more about what Street Smarts Networking is.
Sure. Well, first of all, part of the reason I chose that as a title is back when the book was written in 1984. Right around 1984. Everything I've learned, everything that I talk about is things that I've personally learned. I want to be very authentic. I don't want to talk about things I've read in a book, the things that I've tested that I know that works. So, and again, everything changed March of 2020, and we all know what happened there. I went from in-person to online. Now I do very little in-person, and everything I'm doing online just because of the value of my time, and I can be more effective and efficient as it relates to what I do.
Exactly. And I think everyone had a massive change in 2020. It was interesting. So for me, I had been in the online industry. I had been doing online training for a while. And so it was just sort of, okay, great. We call this Tuesday. We're good with this. But a lot of people really did have to change the way that they networked, and we couldn't do it in person anymore. And online networking is very different, right? What was that transition like for you guys?
The old saying, a duck in the water, to me, it was a very natural, because when I was in person, my whole concept and philosophy was showing up to be of value, to figure out how I could give to other people. I mean, part of my history, and when I started networking, Harvey McKay is a 70-year friend of our family. And he taught me that your net worth is in direct relationship to the value of your network. So I knew the importance. And so going back, and one of the guys that I learned from and was on stage a couple of different times, he used to say, if you believe the promise, you pay the price. So the price to me as an introvert, I had to figure out how to be comfortable developing these new relationships with people I just met. And I wanted to do it in a quick level because, to me, it just was the right thing to do. I don't have time to waste. I knew what I've got a vision as it relates to what I'm doing. My intention is to live a life of meaning, and I don't have time to waste with a lot of people. So obviously, as you get older and older, time becomes more precious. And so anyhow, I just do it over and over again. I focus on what I can do to continually get better. My mindset is always get better because there's people that need me. I mean, every time I have a conversation, I go into that conversation with the mindset that there's something that I'm going to be able to do to help the other person. And typically, and if you reflect back when you and I originally met, I originally said, refresh my memory because I'm meeting a lot of people, and part of it's knowing your people, but refresh my memory of what you do, what you're doing to advance what you do, and then let me figure out how I can be of value to you. Because to me, that's the key. Focus on being of value to the other person. So when it started into the online, the first thing I did, because I realized most people weren't going to know what to do, I started creating a list of other networking events that were happening online. So when I first had a one-on-one, it's like I shared with you the ones that I go to. I've actually got many more that I don't go to, but I've sort of figured out what are the right ones for me.
Exactly. And now I want to rewind for a second because you hit on something which I think is really important, and that is you're a master networker, but you're also an introvert. And I think that a lot of people are going to think that the two things are mutually exclusive. You can't be a good networker and be an introvert at the same time. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about that. I'd also like you to say how, as an introvert, do you navigate the space of networking? Because I think that's a terrifying thing for most introverts. They think I'll never be able to do it. So what is your secret sauce?
Sure. First of all, it's knowing that you can be a situational extrovert, meaning that situational extrovert, and everybody's heard the expression, I've got 2 ears, 1 mouth. It's mastering the art of asking questions. The biggest mistake that I see that people make is when they see that first opening, no matter what it is somebody's representing, they go right to the jugular. It's like, how can I sell this person? But, I take a look, my mindset is a long-term tail, meaning the fact that ultimately when I have a first one-on-one, and I look at it as sort of like dating, what's the objective of going on a date? To see if you want a second date. But I want to make sure that the other person's going to come away with the right, with some value, because I realize to reach the next level. And one of the things I know that you know about me, because we've had a couple conversations, and I love acronyms. And so my acronym of how to reach a higher level based on whatever it is that you're doing, the R is your reputation. There are many people that you have the first date and their only interest is, what can I sell you? And, they become very transparent. So I wanted to make sure I had the right reputation. The E is the experience. What kind of an experience is the other person going to have because you've connected with them? The A, are you authentic and are you an authority as it relates to what you're doing? C, clarity and communication and certainty. People today more than ever are looking to get results. And H, were you helpful and helping them? It's not about you. And then did you give them hope? Because especially with what's going on in the world today, and there's many different things without getting into that. And one of the things that I'll quite often say to people, the one thing that virtually anybody and everybody can agree upon is there's so much misinformation in the marketplace that we don't know the truth. So I want to make sure that I'm always sharing the truth from my perspective of what I've learned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think you said something really powerful there too, and that's hope. Sometimes that's all, especially if you're an entrepreneur, sometimes that's all you have to go on is that hope, the hope that it's going to work. And, in those moments when you're building and you're in the messy middle and you're not quite getting traction yet, so I think that's a very powerful thing right there. And I think that I've heard the term a long time ago, and now I've sort of procured it, called pitch slapping, where you just walk up and you're just pitching something to somebody. And while there's got to be some level of pitching inside of the sales thing, I think people rely on that too much, either because they're in a place of desperation or a place of lack, or like they're not going to have enough, and they feel like they have to do this to get more, when in fact the opposite is true. Coming from a place of service is really what needs to happen first. how can I serve? How can I help? There's more than enough abundance for everyone. It's like, how are we going to do this cool stuff together? I have a hoodie that says doing cool stuff with my friends. And that's how I like to do, that's how you do business. And hey, it's more fun than trying to just pitch slap everyone.
You know,
Right.
yes, and you hit on a couple key points. You mentioned hope, which I mentioned at the end. And again, I've got an acronym for that, which is helping other people elevate by empowering, helping other people elevate and empower. Pitch, and again, on online, and quite often they've got these breakout rooms, and you get in the breakout rooms with similar people. You don't want to sound like a broken record. You need to have some kind of variation in your pitch, and you have to understand what your pitch is about. To me, and this relates to what we're talking about, my acronym for P is practice and perfect your presentation. And then the I is, what is your intention? It's not to sell somebody in a networking event. It's to set up the one-on-one. The magic happens when you have a meaningful conversation with another person. And that's where the T comes in. Think about who you are talking with by asking questions. The better the questions, you're going to get better the answers. Listen, and don't just go into to trying to sell the person. That's one of the biggest mistakes that I believe people make when they network. They're too focused on selling rather than thinking about collaborations is one. And the second thing is they're not branding themselves. My business partner, who I mentioned to you, he's branded himself as a single source solution. We can all create the brand. So anyhow, C, clarity and communication, and H, how and why they want to have a conversation with you, because that's really where the magic happens. So the point is, in your pitching, you want to develop meaningful relationships.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And once I got that, just to reiterate on it, once I got that, it was something, not only were things a lot more fun because I'm doing cool stuff with my friends, but it made things so much easier for me. And I didn't feel in this place where I had to go out and do this salesy thing. I could actually just create these cool teams of people that will go out and change the world. So I want to talk a little bit, because you also do what you call your 8 Ps of prosperity, kind of, being the letters guy. Can you go through that a little bit? Like, what are the 8 Ps of prosperity? Then we'll get into a little bit about how you got to where you are.
Sure. Part of it, ultimately, when I started my entrepreneurial journey, I didn't know exactly where I was going to end up. I just knew I was going to be successful. Now that I've gone through the entrepreneurial journey, I'm 73 years young, and I've gotten to that level of prosperity. And so, again, part of as you get older, you've got to have these little segues and know where you want to go. So as far as the 8 Ps, what was your plan? When I started, my plan was, according to the way my parents laid it down, go out, get a good education, get a good job. Well, I knew I was going into our family business, go find your life partner, and you work hard and everything's going to work out. Well, shortly I came to the realization that you don't have to work hard in the business. You want to work smart. You want to work hard on yourself. So the part of the plan, and then you have these, different things that happen along as far as your plan. These defining moments, like mine happened when I came across a cassette tape series by Wayne Dyer. And it was How to Be a No Limit Person. And I started to come to the realization that the limits that existed in my life, I was responsible for them being there. So once you take responsibility for what is, you can take it for what will be. But, the reason I'm talking about this, the first part of the 8 Ps is your plan. And sometimes things happen and you have to zig in a zagging world, because the world's always going to change. The constant life is change. So that was one of the Ps. The next one is partners, the people you partner with. When I started off as an entrepreneur, I dove in, I was ignorance on fire. I didn't know what I didn't know. And in the first 6 months, I created $102,000 in debt. And the only reason I know the number is because I ended up meeting a person who has become my life partner, and we've been happily married for 40 years, and she wanted to know where I was financially. So she wanted to take over the books because I never liked looking at those numbers because my intention was always to be successful. So, I always focus on human relationships and creating success. So, she took over the books. So that was one of my partners. But, I think back along the progress of how I've gotten to where I am today and the different people I've been partner with. Not all of them are living anymore, but partnering with the right people can make a difference. Just like partnering with the wrong people will make a difference in the wrong way. So, but once the pandemic happened, two of the people that I'm now partners with, and there's many of them, and I could go on and on because I've got a list of about, from my perspective, about 15 people that I look at different kinds of partnerships, different levels of partnership. But so another one is the people that you're partners with. Then persistence is another one. You've got to, it's like there was no stopping one way or the other. And you've got to continually monitor your progress, from a networking perspective. Knowing your numbers is important. I don't, even though I don't necessarily need to work today, I work because my life purpose, which is another one, is to live a life meaning based on showing up to be of value. But you want to know your numbers. My numbers today, I do about 45 hours of networking a month. That nets me 80 one-on-ones, different, from either referrals or people that I meet through networking. So, again, it's knowing your numbers, being clear on your intention, understanding your purpose, understanding the process that you go through. There's a lot of P's that I could give you, but the promise, that was one of the big ones. One of my mentors, originally was an indirect mentor, but I actually was on stage. He said, if people believe the promise, they'll pay the price. To me, the price was the fact that I had to work on my skill set so that I could create the kind of life that I wanted. That was the promise and the price. And I knew that if I did it persistently, that I could create the kind of success. Now, when I started, because I knew I wanted to get away from our family business. I got tired of shoveling the white stuff that came down from the sky, growing up in Minnesota. So I wanted to move to Arizona. So part of my whole thing when I started off was to make sure that I could do the things that I knew that were necessary to create the success that I knew I wanted to create for myself. And that's how I've gotten to be, having a prosperous life. But I also had to deal with the 6 F's. Run those real high. The first one is fear, which is face everything and rise.
Yeah.
Second one is faith. Third one is focus. Fourth one is fun. You've got to have fun because people, if you're efforting, people can feel that. Next one's flexibility. Going back to what I said earlier, it's a changing world. You've got to be able to adjust based on the changes that are happening, be it AI now or pandemics or whatever, whatever happens. And the last one is fail, which is for all I've learned. Any time when I originally started off, Dr. Robert Nancy said, there's certain lessons you're supposed to have in life. And until you learn your lesson, life will continually trip you up in that lesson. So to me, anytime something didn't work out, I didn't look at it as a failure. I looked at it as a learning experience, something that was going to benefit me. So.
Absolutely. And I think, I like the way that you reframed the fail part because that is such an integral part of being in business is pivoting and flexibility, like you said, and failing. And it doesn't sound like something that's really good, but you learn a lot from it if you're not failing. I remember talking to a friend of mine. He's been an entrepreneur for 30 some odd years. And I was really frustrated about something. And I looked at him. I'm like, wow, I really messed that up. I must be doing it right. Because, if you're not taking these chances, if you're not going to make the mistakes that you need to make to move forward, you need to be very risk tolerant. Yeah. So I like the fact that I like the fact that you rephrased that, with the acronym. So talking about things not going right, because this is something I think people have had some difficulty with. Have you ever had an experience with a partner, especially one that hasn't gone well? What are some of the things you look for when you're getting into a business partnership with someone? Like, what are some of the things that have worked well for you, and maybe some of the things that didn't quite go so well?
You know, as you're looking to partner up with people, there's people that have got the wisdom and experience that are going to be beneficial for you from that perspective. And from a networking perspective, what's worked for me is I show up giving, giving, giving. I don't keep score. And that's how I've developed the partnership with Tom Gay and James Feldman. Both of them are brilliant. They're a couple years older than me. They've been very, very successful, but my focus was what I could do to be of value to them. Now, there's the other side of the people that could use my help, meaning, the value that I bring, because nobody feels that they need help, but they could use the value I bring. So the two key things there is they've got to be serious and committed to being successful. One of the things that James Feldman taught me is understanding 3D thinking. So it's understanding the depth of what's going on, understanding their mindset, what are their saboteur programs, what kind of resources are they, what's their knowledge base one way or the other. And what I try to do is, what I learned early on is you want to create interdependent, not codependent relationships, meaning there's a lot of places I can guide them to. It's like when you and I first met, I guided you to different resources above and beyond just networking things. So because people are going to show you by what they do or don't do, are they really willing to go forward? Again, it goes back to what I said. I want people that are serious and committed to being successful. More, anyhow. And then the third category of people that I'm looking for are resources that, if it's not my, the people in my, sphere that I can guide them to, where can I point them to that will give them, like one of the guys that I met through networking, another person, again, there's different kinds of partnerships. Maury Zokovich, he's got the MauryMethod.com, the MORRY method.com. If you remember what the bleep, which was a way of reprogramming your mindset. There are places I could guide people to that would help them, because if I'm looking to be of value to other people, I can't, there's other people that have got a higher level of expertise, wisdom in certain areas than I do. I know what my state of genius is, and I stay in those areas. Like when it comes to technology, forget about it. That's where James Feldman, he's way advanced in the AI. Tom Gay, created refer.com, who I've, mentioned to, his whole thing, and so it's like having some kind of intention and strategy as it relates to what your end objective is.
So I love to go into the backstories of things. How did you become a power networker? What was the series of events that brought you to this, to being a power networker?
It was a combination. First of all, everybody around me that knew me continually told me how good of a networker, and so I sort of owned it, and then I continually did it, and I do it. And, all of a sudden my mindset was, this is who I am, and this is how I show up, and this is the reputation that I've been able to, roll into or become. And so again, it's seeing yourself, the person you want to become, consistently doing the right information. And I believe that anybody can create whatever they want to create, no matter what that is, taking out the physical handicaps. If you're 5'3" and want to be a world-class basketball player, the odds are stacked against you. Or if you want, but beyond that, we're all human. I had to reprogram myself. It's like when I started on my journey, I understood that because I got a degree, but I didn't get the education, so I had to change my mindset. So I started listening to a lot of cassette tapes. For those of you that remember what a cassette tape is, and then it went into CDs, and then I went to the seminars and I read the books because I knew no matter what it was that I wanted to accomplish, I had to become the person. I had to become the networker. So it's a journey, and I think it was Ben Sweetland said something about the success is a journey or something like that. I don't even remember exactly what to say, but I got a whole lifetime to create the things I wanted to create.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Beautiful. So we're getting towards the end of things. And I do want to ask one question. And I always love to ask this one. What do you see yourself doing in 5 years?
Exactly what I'm doing now. Exactly what I'm doing
Awesome.
now. Even if I won the lottery, ended up with 20 million, 50 million, it doesn't make any difference. I would be able to pour more gas on the fire, so to speak. But, I'm traveling the world with my wife. We take one major trip every single year. Last year we went to 6 countries in Asia. I bought the t-shirt, Happy Wife, Happy Life. This year we're going to 5 countries in South America. We want to have hit 70 different countries by the time we're 75. One of our dream vacations that we want, but unfortunately because of world circumstances, we're not able to go there, as we would like to do a Baltic cruise. Now, I have been to Russia. I've got a very interesting story I can tell the audience of what happened when I was coming out of Russia, but that's a whole other piece of the equation. But, I've done a lot of world traveling, and we're just enjoying life and making a difference where we can. My purpose is to live a life of meaning based in helping other people.
And I think that you said, so way back when I was in the corporate world, my boss and I had this joke that if we ever won the lottery, we'd be like, peace out, we're done. You're not going to see me tomorrow. And we would always do strategic planning around that. We called it the lottery planning, just in case something happened. And I think that that's one of the things I didn't like about a 9-to-5 is I was always trying to find a way out of it. Whereas you're doing something that you love doing, that even if you won hundreds of millions of dollars, you'd still be doing the same thing. And I think that's something rare. And something to really have as a goal is to do that one thing that you love so much that you could have all of the money in the world and you'd still want to do it. And I think that's really, really important for people to look at. I think it's a nice way for people to look at it, because especially if you're stuck in a 9-to-5, you're trying to play the lottery to get out of it. Now go find something where even if you won the lottery, you'd want to continue.
Well,
yeah.
And as you mentioned, that was my first goal, because I was in a 9-to-5. It was our family business. Now I had more freedom and flexibility than most people, but I got tired of somebody telling me when I was supposed to start, how long I was supposed to work, when I could take a vacation, the politics that happen in almost every business. And I didn't like that. And so that was part of my burning desire of why I wanted to become successful as an entrepreneur.
Absolutely. So, Robert, thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate it. Thanks for dropping some wisdom to us.
You're welcome.
Thanks for tuning in to the Hustle and Grind podcast, where we unpack what it really takes to build something that matters. If today's conversation hit home, do me a favor. Share it with someone who's in the trenches too. And if you're building your own brand, platform, or message and want help turning that story into serious authority, head over to theauthorityforge.com to see how we can help. Until next time, keep showing up, keep shipping, and keep chasing the work that sets you on fire. I'm Andrew, and this was the Hustle and Grind podcast.